to show up on our page.
Yeah, it's about a 25-second delay. So we haven't called it a weekly roundtable in this one because we haven't done one in like 6 weeks. So. And there we go. Look how wonderfully this is working. I love it when things work. So, all right, gang, welcome to the weha.com Roundtable. I'm John Lyons, joined as always by Ronnie Newton, the managing editor of weha.com. Tonight, we welcome two of our town Republican leaders. Mark Merritt is the Republican Town Committee Chair. Mark is a husband, father of three, a community volunteer, and an experienced financial professional. Mark has spent his entire career in the financial services industry leading and managing corporate relationships. As a 26-year resident of West Hartford, Mark has always taken pride in giving back as a volunteer coach, an active member of civic and Jewish organizations. We also welcome Lee Gold, who is a member of our volunteer town council and the minority leader for the GOP. One of you, can you turn your volume down just a bit and get a little bit of a feedback loop here? Sorry, guys. We also welcome Lee Gold, who is a member of our volunteer town council and the minority leader of the GOP. Lee Gold has resided in the town of West Hartford since 1997. He is married and has two school-aged boys. He attended the Kingswood Oxford School and then Lehigh University, earning his degree in history. Lee attended the University of Connecticut School of Law, and joined Butler, Norris, and Gold in Hartford, Connecticut, continuing to practice law there today as a partner of the firm. He also serves on the Kingswood Oxford Heads Advisory Council. He's very active in West Hartford Little League. I think he's a little big to play Little League myself, but that's just me. He's been a coach. There we go. He's been a coach for over, that's what I get for trying to vamp here, but it is April 1st. So he's been a coach for over 7 years. He's been on the board of directors as vice president for Tumblebrook Country Club. Lee is active in bar associations, including the Connecticut Bar Association and the Hartford County Bar Association. He also served as a member of the Board of Trustees of the Emmanuel Synagogue. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. How are you both tonight?
We're doing great here. And thank you, John and Ronnie, for having us. Feeling great here on April 1st.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Now, before we get going, we're at a time of, what I think is very unfortunate divisiveness. If you see someone with a D over their head, or you see someone with an R over their head, and you're on the other side, it's almost like, oh, got to go to war. And that's not the way we run things here. And I do want to remind all of our viewers, and I'll try to do it once or twice with the show, is all of our counselors, Democrat, Republican, or independent, it's a volunteer position. They're unpaid. They've really got no other interest in being on council other than trying to help the community, because you're not getting many rewards for it. You're getting beat up in the elections. You're getting beat up by the other party, but it is a volunteer position. So I do, want to ask our audience and everybody, let's treat it with that appropriate decorum, and let's get rolling. Mark, let me start with you, and bear with me. I'm going to open this. Hopefully my computer agrees. You put out a new plan, kind of a re-rollout or a reintroduction of the party to the town. And I want to talk to you about some of the issues, or really, I want to let you talk about some of the issues. First of all, do you have that list in front of you? Do you have it handy?
I do, and I think I have it committed to memory.
He's memorized it.
I'm sure you do, but I just opened it. That's why I was kind of killing time there for a second. But let's talk about some of your ideas. And first of all, what caused this? What caused you to step back and say, okay, we need to kind of reinvent and repackage ourselves?
No, John, thank you for that. One of the things that we looked at as an organization, and the team got together probably late fall after the election cycle to think about, what are some of the solutions that we want to promote in having our viewpoint. First, I think too long for I've been here is we don't want to, we want to have a good dialogue. And part of that, having a good dialogue, is coming up with solutions on our end. I grew up watching Crossfire and seeing the things that are happening. You get across the table from somebody, and you argue or debate the issues, but in the end, you want to come out with a solution that's benefiting everybody. And so one of the things that we've realized is that we need to have our pillars, our program, and our platform that we feel value in town, not just now, but also well into the future. So that is kind of why we did this, is to help set a framework for a conversation with the folks in town, the moderates, the Democrats, the unaffiliated, just to show that we do have some ideas and thoughts about how we can approach things and things differently. And 4 key areas we thought were very important to the town and the community at large. So that's kind of why we looked at economic development, safety and security, education, and also our fiscal responsibility as an organization. And that flows into our Republican values, my Republican values, as well as things that Lee and I both agree on as a whole, coming from I'll put it, a moderate perspective, right? I'm a fiscal conservative, social moderate. And so that is my framework of trying to create this pillars and working with the rest of the town committee and our new members, which has been growing for the last year or so, which is great. So thank you for that question. That's why.
Yeah. So, and I want to break it down. I don't want to beat it to death, but I do want to break it down. If we can take this step by step, let's talk about economic development. I think we're all interested in it. I know I get very excited when I hear about whether it's new housing developments or new business developments coming to town. I thought the Yukon property was a unique opportunity. Maybe it still is. We're going to find out in the future. But so let's.
I followed up on that today, actually, and haven't gotten any information. So.
All right. So no breaking news, but
no breaking news.
Okay.
No breaking
I
news.
got excited there for a second, Ronnie. I was like,
I wish I could help you with that, but I couldn't.
So Lee, let me throw this over to you. Just equal time. Talk to us a little bit about economic development, and if I can challenge you, is there something you look at now and say, hey, I really think we could approach this better? Give me examples, because I need examples, frankly, to fully understand the issue.
Yeah, no, I number one, thank you very much for your time. You and Ronnie, appreciate being part of this. It's a great opportunity. In terms of economic development, I've day one actually I met with Matt Hart, and we discussed certain ideas that made sense in terms of really strategic consolidation of certain buildings, of certain town properties that make sense. Some are obviously dated, older, and potentially could be repurposed. Obviously, there's a discussion about St. Bridget's School that's come out. So that's a very exciting opportunity where you have the ability to repurpose a building that can be used for the town. And those are the types of areas that I want to look at. Specifically in the Elmwood section and Park Road area. I think I'm a little partial because my office is right around the corner from there. But there's a lot of opportunity. I love West Hartford Center. I love Blue Black Square. I think there are still opportunities there. However, I think looking at other areas of town make a lot of sense as well. Specifically, we have one park that was approved by the council to begin the process, and I'm really looking forward to that development. I think the developers there have a great plan, a great idea going forward. I think there's some opportunity, talking about Mark's platform, the GOP's platform, but not necessarily Mark's, but he talked about it initially. In education, there's opportunity there too, and maybe we can talk about this later. I don't want to steal the hour show to talk about certain ideas, but
Lee,
I think there's.
Let me stop because I'm going to get to education. I want to hit on all of the bullet points. Do you mind if just for a moment we pause on education?
Sure, absolutely.
Give me my word, I'll come back to it. So you mentioned what I don't know, shame on me. I should know that. Was it one park? The new residential.
One park is the building.
The former Sisters of St. Joseph.
Right.
Correct.
So now one of the things that I recall, I watched, and forgive me, I don't remember how you voted, but I watched I did watch the hearing and I did watch the vote on the approval. And I know there was some split on the tax abatements. And I think one of the challenges is, like, I look at, remember Amazon a couple of years ago, they wanted to do Amazon HQ2, and lots of towns were vying for it, and New York got it and then lost it. That's another story. But talk about, and both of you, or one of you answer, how do I think there's no question that temporary tax abatements can draw business. Where do you draw the line? And Lee, and forgive me, where did you vote on that issue? Because I honestly don't know how you voted on that issue.
I voted in favor.
Okay, doesn't surprise me. I've watched you at a lot of meetings, and you know, so
I vote my mind. I vote in my from my perspective. You know, in a business perspective, I think it's important to view economic development that way, and try to reach some common ground with everybody on the council who I respect, and I do respect everybody that I work with there. But you know, specifically with one park, it was a unique situation. It was a historical building. I think there's some plan to maintain some of the historical perspective associated with it. There's some affordable housing component that went into it. So there's a lot of factors involved in that. And when you're talking about those tax incentives and things of that nature, yes, it does draw business. But I think we have to be careful and thoughtful about having a comprehensive plan going forward. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed and discussed fully, so that we can make the right decisions and leave our the next elected officials kind of a roadmap, so that they know what to do and how to do it, and what our thoughts were in promoting or not those policies.
So one of the things that, John, if you don't mind my stepping in here for a second, one of the items mentioned in the platform's economic development bullet point is talking about the economic development department being more proactive rather than reactive. So do you think something like setting a policy on when and if tax abatements would be offered is something that should be kind of put into a plan? I'm not sure if it's I don't think it's mentioned in the plan of conservation and development. Is that some part of what you mean by that, having kind of a strategy?
No, I don't believe it is, but listen, going forward with any sort of economic development, you need a strategy. You need a plan. Going forward and just making one decision at a time doesn't make sense in my mind. So I think a well thought out method within which to help promote the development in our town and attract business to our town. And if that's the way to do it, then so be it. I mean, I think that's important.
And I think with regards to that question, we need to have a framework as it relates to that approach. It's not a cookie cutter, but you have to look at each of the development opportunities as on its own merits, no pun intended there. But how do we look through that and evaluate it? So not being closed off to negotiations and having these conversations allows us to get away from, and part of the platform and what we're trying to accomplish here, Ronnie and John, and the rest of the community, is not just a short-term view of things, but a long-term view, not for the next 5, but how about the 10, 15, 25 years down the road on how we look and feel as an organization, as a company, as a community itself. But the tax abatements in the short term, everybody seems to forget, but once that is hurdle or a tiering is approached, those taxes are on forever, right? So once you get over that 5 or 10 year tax abatement or tiering approach, those taxes are being paid forever on that property until it's no longer there. But that is kind of the framework we need to think about, is what happens in the future and the vision from a short-term versus a long-term aspect of it, and
Mark,
updating properties.
And Mark, I couldn't agree more. And it's tough because I tend to be a little bit active politically, and I've got to when Ronnie and I do the show, I really try to go out of my way to take off any political thinking. But that's when I watched the debate that night, and I so enjoy watching these public hearings and watching the votes. That's what went through my head. This is not forever. And I feel like the other thing is it was almost like, it's certainly not people on town council, but perhaps some of the residents didn't realize these tax abatements, they're not applied to the resident. If I buy or rent in that building, I'm still paying taxes. I'm still paying my federal tax, my state tax, my town taxes. I'm still paying all the taxes. It's really just about getting the developer in here to say, hey, look, this is a great opportunity. So, and some of a frustration for me, a partisan frustration, is that I think sometimes there can be, the messaging gets lost maybe in some of the conversation. But I couldn't agree with you more, Mark. I just want to be clear on that.
And the one thing I do want to add, John, if you don't mind,
Sure.
is let's not forget that the project itself is over $65 million investment in our town.
Yeah.
And when was the last time we saw when was the last time we saw an investment like that on Park Road?
Yeah.
And I think I'm excited. And Ronnie, to your question about economic development, I'm excited about what the town has done with regards to St. Bridget's property. I know it's kind of new to everybody what has transpired over the last week or so. But if you look at the areas that the Elmwood Community Center, where the Faxon Library is, or some of those other areas of town that we need to actually modernize. How do we look at an urban walking center for that corner of New Britain Avenue and Quaker? To help revitalize apartments, whether it's working style apartments and those type of things. But we need to think about bigger picture strategically. And so the economic development conversation that I would like that we're putting forth, Ronnie, is, how are we thinking bigger? How are we looking at consolidating some of this town properties to increase the grand list, to get young families to move in? Maybe it's another development in the center of town, that Farmington LaSalle, I think that was proposed 5 years ago. Why not revisit that? Looking at the more apartments that are walkable, and having that infrastructure within the town and utilizing the space that we have constructively. And that's kind of where we are going with how do we take a broad brush and look at things in the development way long term.
So with that being said, and Lee, I know I cut you off on education. I promise we're going to get there, but let's talk about safety and security first. I'm really just going in the order of the document here. Talk to us a little bit, big picture, and then we can drill down on a couple of issues. Talk to us about some of the big picture things that concern you, and then we can drill down on it.
Lee, do you want me to go first, or you want to go?
Well, I can kick it off. I mean, one of the things that I think is a trigger point, a hot point in town, is all the panhandling. That's seemed to have kind of picked up and kept on going, and there seems to be a lot of discussion as to what to do and how to handle it. My colleagues in my caucus, I know Chris Williams was very helpful in doing a lot of research into zone applicable codes in other towns, specifically Hartford, actually in cities, how they deal with panhandlers. I actually looked out into other states, Arizona specifically, and I know Mark was helpful in finding this as well, have signs up, you can find it on YouTube, that deal with how you can provide money to organizations rather than giving it directly to panhandlers. But the issue really is whether or not there's a theory of aggressive panhandling as opposed to non-aggressive, and whether or not you're a captive person being asked. But things like that concern me. The increase in crime in town. In my profession, I've seen it kind of increase. And those things concern me, and I applaud Chief Riddick in terms of what he does. I think the Civilian Review Board that will ultimately be established, I believe, in July, I think will be very helpful in getting the community involved. And I know Mark was talking about that as well in terms of having more locality of people involved in the process to be involved.
Mark?
No, absolutely. And I think I would probably be on record of saying, with regards to the new policy of I'd love Chief Riddick's perspective on the new ordinance going into effect of no street parking. That takes a couple of things away from, I feel, our town dynamics. It's a cultural thing that we've had, community-based. But I think with the 9 o'clock, lock your cars type approach that the town has been putting forth in the police department, how is that affecting and will affect the safety and security of the town itself? I also want to make sure that we're giving the resources to both the police and fire department that they need to modernize, whether it's new training, new techniques, other facilities potentially to help modernize what they need to do, more community policing. I love the fact that before COVID, right, we had bike officers, we had more folks walking around town, patrolling. How do we give the resources back to them? And we need to look at that in collaboration. So the Citizen Review Board will be helpful, but I think some of the support that we need to provide to both law and fire department is critical for as our town expands, and how we look at how we can handle everything that's coming into the town, and the speeding that's going through town, walking through the school district. So that is a big concern of a lot of the residents, and that's kind of one of the things we want to address and help and bring that dialogue to the forefront.
Ronnie, any questions? You want me to keep rolling here?
No, keep rolling. I think I'm gonna ask it at the end. And you can.
Let me
She
tell you
wants to
guys
ask that
what's
question.
happening with Ronnie and me. We're not even texting each other, but we know how each other think. We're hitting on so many things that we've listed as questions. We're asking ourselves, do we ask the questions now or do we wait to the end?
Yeah.
So that's what's happening here. So I apologize. That's why Ronnie and I are glancing at each other, because we know exactly what we're thinking.
Yeah.
So
let me.
My question is going to really be is how to pay for it, I guess, and I mean, that's something that
that's a budgetary question.
That every town is going to struggle with that. Every community is going to struggle with that.
Right, but Ronnie, that's a great question, though. All of these items that we're talking about here, and then the other two we haven't gotten to yet, they all go around as fiscal responsibility with the town. So I think on the public chat here, we're seeing some questions about it. So I mean, as I said, you got to think bold, right? One of the things I talked to the town committee when we looked at our pillars and created things, if you shoot for the Mars, let's make sure we get to the moon, right? So part of that is the infrastructure that we currently have for the police. Ideally, and I haven't talked to Chief Riddick or Chief of the Fire Department on this yet, but what about a combined fire and safety facility for our town? Right. So how do we end up freeing public buildings that are outdated that we're continuing to put money into a combined fire and police safety for a town our size? I think that warrants it. And putting it strategically, the police department has outgrown their facility there and on Raymond Road. And what about putting something together there, then freeing up space to combat that? And part of it is the narrative. That is, well, I don't want that firehouse to close in my part of town. But part of that is that fire department, that fire station might not be on call that day, right? So you might be getting a fire station coming to respond to something, and that's on cross town, that's on call. So there's some things that we need to think strategically and long term about, and sometimes it's good to think big. And there's a couple of things that Lee and I have talked about and have shared about broader picture, about looking at freeing up public land that's not taxed right now, and how do we convert that into homes, residential, and other things that become taxable, and helping with regards to pay for a lot of the items that we talk about in an ongoing manner. So one of the things that you'll get from, go ahead.
Just to dovetail on what you're saying, I know, I think it looks like David Brandwine asked a question about, can you clarify what is meant by consolidating town properties to increase the grand list? And it's pretty much exactly what Mark is talking about, which is when you do consolidate, for an example, say the police, the police department, then there's an opportunity for private developers to come in to bring in business, bring in mixed use, bring in commercial, bring in new companies that can work in those locations, and thereby increasing the grand list. So that's a simple answer to that question. But in terms of looking globally, looking down the road, looking 10, 20 years from now, if I may, it's while it is education based, John, it's more of a grand list growth idea and business growth idea. One that's probably going to be met with significant resistance initially, but I think our schools, as we were going through the budget, as I was looking, one of the questions I asked of Tom Moore was, whether or not there's been a list of identifying schools and buildings that need to either be repurposed or not needed based on the decreased enrollment. Now, when we do that, then you have an opportunity maybe for some consolidation of schools. And one of the things that I think would be an interesting thought, and I know it's been discussed in years past and met with significant resistance, but we've always had this north-south divide in town. What if we had one high school? What if we combined everything into one state-of-the-art, updated, top-flight high school that would be the pinnacle, the pie in the sky of New England? And then you would basically, in a very simplistic discussion and analysis, we would free up the Hall property area where you could build and put in development that would have a bunch of different types of properties, including some affordable workforce housing, things of that nature. And you have a development there, thereby increasing housing in town, bringing people, bringing in businesses, bringing in revenue. The other then is you think about Conard. If we're combining the high schools, that location is closer to the highway, and it might be conducive to some sort of state-of-the-art style business park that would be that would work with the environment there, creating some walking trails, kind of, I see kind of a modern version of what Signal looks like. And, create that type of space there, that would increase the grand list there. And, you create a high school that would combine all the students into kind of a central area of the town. And I have some thoughts and ideas where that could be too, on town properties. And you have this grand scheme that we'd look at potentially 10, 15 years from now, and we will be ahead of the curve, creating a scenario for our students of preparing our students for college and beyond in a much more modern way. I think that would be instrumental to development in our town, on both housing, on both grand list growth, business, and for our students. And at the same token, and at the same time, you'd be creating a combined West Hartford. There wouldn't be a north-south Conard Hall split, and that rivalry, so to speak. The other thing and the offshoot that would create is really a diversity of where people would go, because no longer would you pick an area of the town that goes to a specific high school. So people would be more free to disperse through the town and identify areas that might be different, unique, like the Elmwood area, as opposed to being in Bishop's Corner. And you would say, I want to go into that area because, well, we have a new place in St. Bridget's, and things like that could have been developed. So you create much more movement within the town of our population, and it's not necessarily isolated into certain areas. And I think in a global way, that makes a lot of sense. I know. I think I just threw a lot to you right there.
You sure did. I'm not going to write a headline because it's April Fool's Day. So I feel like people would say, "What did he say?" Wow, that's a very revolutionary.
There wouldn't be any more fights after basketball games, that's for sure.
Correct. No one taking down goalposts at football games. Nothing like
solve that problem. So
and part of that is bringing the cultural aspects of both of those current communities together, right, and fostering more of a community that's coming together in what we've been seeing over the last number of years, right? So that is another outcropping of what we would like to see, is that it then brings the town together as one unity, right? Having the elementary and middle schools where they are is perfect, walking, having those community type things. But as the kids get older, more resources, think of what Tom and the rest of the teachers could have with having more resources and having a state-of-the-art facility that is technologically up to date, solar panels, right? All funding, all that type of stuff in a great campus environment for that. So those are the type of things that, with Lee's help and a lot of the other folks that are being elected, we need to think like that. We need to think bigger. We need to think outside of our box and trying to address that for our growth of our town and to enhance the services, not just being a top in the area or once in a while, but all the time.
With a $3 trillion infrastructure proposal on the table in Washington, we need to find the grant money to build the school or something, because that maybe $100 million to build a school. But look, I think all forward-thinking ideas. Guys, you've really touched on education, and I think you've touched on fiscal responsibility, but I don't want to gloss it over. And Lee, you were in the middle of education when I cut you off before. Do you have anything you want to add to that? You want to talk about fiscal responsibility? We can get to Q&A. We got a lot of questions here in the comments, and then Ronnie, I've got a list.
I think they're pouring in now.
Yeah.
In terms of education, we most recently had it was actually the first time we got to talk. We were able to talk to Tom more about his budget. We had a meeting the other night, a joint meeting between the Board of Ed and the Town Council. And it was a great opportunity to be able to speak openly with Tom more about the proposed budget and what was going on. He's proposing an increase, and I'm concerned by that. Obviously, it's important for the students to have education. I think this has been a very difficult year. I applaud across the country all efforts, but specifically in West Hartford, getting the students educated through the pandemic. It's been tough. I've heard from too many people about students that have either excelled or seem to lag behind, and I think we're going to be at an interesting crossroads as we hopefully get back to a full-time situation. It's been a year like no other, quite frankly, and I do applaud their efforts. But I am concerned with increases. I know that the town itself would be receiving federal monies of upwards of 35 million, of which 10 would be earmarked towards the Board of Ed, to the school. And I think those monies need to be used in an appropriate way that would make sense over some time to help defray the costs of these increases that are being proposed. So those are some of the issues that I think are important for us to look at, address, and try to come to some terms on, so that our taxpayers, our residents, are not feeling the pinch in their pocket, especially when somebody might not have a job or just really trying to exist, and that becomes a problem.
Lee, you've said two things I love, but I want to gently push back on you. Let me, or at least try to peel back the onion a little bit. You brought up the idea of either rebuilding or reinventing our schools, which I love. I mean, I think one of the things that brings people to West Hartford are our schools, in particular our high schools, which are typically ranked, I think, top 100 nationally or close to that, and certainly top 10 within the state. And brand new facilities, brand new teaching labs, brand new equipment is a wonderful idea. I dropped the number 100 million a few minutes ago. But then, we also talk about some of the expenses that Board of Ed is asking for now. And I'm not trying to pick on you, but how do we come together on that? How do we pay for that? And yet we're trying to keep that grand list under control. That
kind of feeds into. I'm glad you asked that. Thank you. That feeds into the sale of certain properties in town that can help alleviate that, plus the added tax benefits, revenues that if for an example, Hall is privatized, Conard is privatized in that sense, then there's revenue that's gained to the town from that, the initial sales, and in perpetuity on tax base. So that's there. Obviously bonding is an issue. The rates are at all-time lows right now. So that might be an option as well. And I'm sure you want to talk about the pension bonds, but that's another topic we can get to. So there's money there, there's opportunity there. And I think with the right plan in place and the right dynamics to move forward, something. I don't want to be complacent, and I think that's a great word. Actually, I used that the other day. You just don't want to be stagnant and complacent. You want to keep pushing, keep moving. And if we just accept the fact that yes, we're the best schools and it's a great town, but how do we continue to make it better? And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to run and wanted to be part of this process.
And Lee, I'm going to jump in because I understood the context, but somebody who tuned in late, I don't think understood the context. You talked about privatizing high school. That's not the idea on the table, to be clear.
Not making them private schools.
A brand new school is built, and the old Conard or Hall, or both Conard and Hall properties are sold for business, industry, residential development. So I'm going to defend you there because I think somebody tuned in late didn't understand the context, and I want to make sure we put it. I almost stopped you when you said it, and then somebody commented, so I should have. But anyway, so the term privatization can be scary when anyway. But
well, along the lines of what you're talking about, or what the council's thinking about doing with the Elmwood Community Center and the Faxon Library, if those operations were to be consolidated in the former St. Bridget's property. Right.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the key component to it is, somebody making a comment, how do you contract, you're contracting to grow. And that sometimes you need to take one step back to go two steps forward in some of these situations. And so how do you look strategically at some of the properties that we have and the jewel of the town that we do have, right? So a lot of the things that we want to accomplish is how do we give back to the kids? The community center is a fantastic idea. And that was kind of the things that have been brought up through the Yukon property. And I'll I guess, open up Pandora's box on that is where do the kids get to go to play basketball or do something in our town. You have to, we are fighting for gym space. We're fighting, or they have to join a private gym to be able to do that one. We're at a town at our size that we don't have the resources right now to provide an opportunity for kids to go and mingle, talk together, have that type of stuff. So this is an opportunity for us to do that. And that is kind of one of the things I feel we're missing here in town, is how do we have that opportunity for a real community center? And it was mentioned on Tuesday night, no Big Y, no Boys and Girls Club, no Y that's here in town. But how do we help foster that in not just the Cornerstone and the Veterans Memorial Rink, but having something that people can go to, pick up games, and be together on top of. So that's kind of where I'm excited about where we see the future and what we're looking at.
Ronnie, we've touched on fiscal responsibilities. You want to talk any more on that, or I can go to Q&A? We've got, like I said, a lot of comments to get into here from a lot of people.
Well, just as we go to talk about fiscal responsibility for a moment, one of the items in the platform was zero-based budgeting, and I know that I've heard it mentioned from time to time as an option for looking at the town budget, and kind of how do you think that could be implemented in reality in a town of this size? Do we have the really ability to step back and build the budget from scratch in that way?
Is that me or Mark?
I'm going to defer to you and Lee on that one.
That was actually one of the things that I discussed with many people as I was knocking on doors. I think, listen, if you have the wherewithal, if you have the passion, if you have the energy to do it, I think there's always that opportunity. I think a zero-based budget does make some sense. I think it's something that probably needs to be explored. Every dollar that's spent, taxpayer's dollar that's spent, needs to be accounted for and needs to be justified. And I think that's a very important part of this entire puzzle. So the simple answer to your question is, do I think it can work? Yes. Should we look to implement it? I think we need to take an honest look at whether or not that makes sense. And I believe it could. And I think there needs to be a true honest look at it rather than continuing with a roll forward style of budget, as I heard from the Board of Ed the other night.
And that's one of the things too, is it's more or less what Lee talked about, some transparency and looking at and having the conversations about items that we're spending money on. And I think it's owed to elected officials and our town professional staff to be able to let people know what we're spending the money on and how effective is it. And so taking a little bit more of a business approach to certain things while being able to, at the greater good, help the community. And so zero-based budgeting, is a lot of firms and a lot of people, and we do it every day from our own personal lives. And so we don't want to go into a lot of debt, but zero-based budgeting gives us an opportunity to fresh look at things and to reevaluate.
So knowing that, we're in the middle of the budget process right now. The Board of Education is going to vote on their budget next week. The town council is supposed to vote on the budget on the 22nd of April. We still don't really have a good feel for what parts of the American Rescue Plan funds might be able to, none of them are going to be able to, or they say can't be used to offset taxes, but there are some expenses perhaps that are being put into the budget this year that could fall into that. Are there some specific ideas that are going to be or are in the process of being brought to the table for how the town can have savings in this budget or increase revenue?
It's a great question. And what the answer that I've gotten, because I've asked about that, I think that was one of the first questions I asked at one of the town council meetings was, how is that money going to be allocated? And rather than double paying from the American Rescue Act, how are we going to deal with that so that we aren't double paying in certain categories? And I know Mr. Privatera and Mr. Hart are on top of that. They're reviewing it, taking, Mr. Privatera indicated there's a list of, they're keeping basically a master list of anything that they can identify that goes to a COVID-related expense. But there hasn't truly been any direction as to how we can use the money, and the budget becomes a moving target because of that is effectively what I said. and what I talked about. And it's frustrating because we're going through the budget process with monies that could be coming from the federal government that can be applied, but we don't necessarily know how they can be applied. So it's again, it's a moving target to try to hit, and that becomes very difficult.
So
yeah, it's too bad we can't. The timing just is always really difficult with the budget. A lot of times it's because of the state budget, but this time you've got this whole American Rescue Plan at the same time as not knowing what the state budget exactly is going to be. So there are a lot of moving targets.
And Ronnie, I appreciate what Lee and Matt and the rest of the town council and Mr. Privatera are doing. It's like you're getting a windfall of money, and you're really not sure how to spend it or can spend it, and it's going to be sitting a pile of money there for that. And what we'd like to see, of course, as residents, is to be able to maybe pay down some things or use it effectively. But again, we're just still in a gray area on what the Treasury will allow towns like ours to get. And what I like about what's happening, we're getting the money directly. So we don't have to wait for the state government to allocate back to us like they do all the time and hold back on us, but we're getting it directly from the Treasury. So which is a benefit for us. And then it's a pot that we didn't realize what we're getting. And so how do we allocate it? So it's a tough thing to do. And how do you budget for it? You have 3 or 4 budgets.
Tough, but a good problem.
Yeah.
Sort of handing us some money. So
I'll take $35 million and I'll try to spend it.
Exactly. Yes. So
I think that was Brewster's Millions.
Yeah, exactly. Get that postage stamp and mail it. It's funny. I was just thinking about that movie today. So, Mark, you penned a letter to the editor, about a week ago, maybe a little bit longer, to Ronnie about zoning and some of the proposed changes at the state level, which would impact local zoning. So, first, can you explain it? Kind of give us a high-level explanation of what the proposed bill is and how it would impact West Hartford, and then give us your thoughts on it.
There are multiple bills right now in the state legislature that address zoning. And one of the things that was pointed out and I've looked at is they want to be able to dictate at a state level what the town of West Hartford or town of Granby or any else on specific mandates as it relates to what has to happen for zoning. And what I like to have is I like what we do in West Hartford, right? There was a very good debate with regards to accessory dwelling units, and it passed. But what is happening is that the state wants to be able to blanket that across the entire counties in all 167 towns, and having a minimum bar for that. I don't like the fact that they're taking control away from us locally to decide what is best for the residents of West Hartford. And I think part of it is the bill is mute for us, but it's a slippery slope. So if they're going to do this now from a zoning perspective, what's going to prevent them from coming down with other mandates on when you need to do certain other things at a bare minimum? So, and it takes control out of what we do as town councilors or Board of Ed to be able to decide on what's best for our environment, whether it's Simsbury, whether it's West Hartford, whether it's Newington, Berlin, Litchfield, Stanford, or Greenwich. So, I mean, those bills right now are looking at the state to be able to combine it from what I've read so far on the multiple bills that are out there. And I would hope that our elected officials will vote no on that. And that's kind of what I put out there, because I want local control of what we decide what we want to do, whether it's with the Yukon property, whether it's with Hall or Concord facilities. I don't want us to have to be hamstrung by what the state has to tell us to do.
And does it, now I've not read the ordinance, I've not read the bill. I've read your letter and I've heard some conversation, but certainly haven't done a deep dive. Does it take, this may seem like a basic question, but we got a lot of people watching who don't know the process. Does it take all zoning power away from the town, or is there's some sort of balance once this is done?
It's actually, there's a couple of factors within that one. I don't have it in front of me, John, so I apologize. But with regards to around if I remember correctly, the busing, the fast track areas there, they want certain mandates around those type of areas that if you have the fast track going through your town. Also with regards to the accessory dwelling units, like I said, we passed it as a town council approved that, but something that that is kind of what they want to mandate throughout all towns within the state is my reading of those ordinances, what they're proposing.
Yeah, I haven't read the whole bill either, but my understanding is it addresses certain things that have to do with affordable housing. I mean, there is what is it, 30G? There is state legislation already regarding affordable housing in town, but this requires, like you said, Mark, it would require all towns to allow accessory dwelling units, and there's some other requirements, but it wouldn't override all zoning for
Right.
all.
And you're
by
absolutely
the
right.
state.
And part of what I also was on the record of opposing the accessory dwelling units here in town, right? So you can see my official letter on that. And part of that is when you look at it, I I had a hard time understanding. We already had rules in place for people that wanted to have an ADU on their property. What I was really confused about as to why that they wanted to make this across the board, and then also with the density in certain areas of town, not restricting it. And so there was some things that were there. We already had it in place that somebody could apply for, and there have been some that already have been approved and already already built. And so my whole thing is looking at comprehensive legislation, especially with our town ordinances, is there has to be certain guidelines in certain neighborhoods that would, lot sizes, right? So why would we put one on a lot size? Now it becomes just 2 units in a driveway, right? But then it's going to be 3 neighbors in a row that could potentially have that. That's kind of where I wanted to have that conversation dialogue before putting that into place.
And I just to piggyback and dovetail off that, I was opposed to it. I was concerned, quite frankly, with the town effectively turning all our 6 properties into the ability to have multi units on the properties, regardless of the size. And I think it creates a little bit more of a stress on the town in a number of different areas. One being policing, fire. Second, education. The schools would there'd be a higher density of people in town that effectively would be renters. So how do you deal with the increase? I mean, the services would need to be accommodated for the increase in the people. That becomes an issue. The other issue is really the truly changing across the town of single family homes into multifamily types of units. So you're going down a slippery slope by establishing that. I applaud Ben Winograd for seeing it through. I think it was a long road for him to do it, but we agreed to disagree. But I think there should have been some limit as to the lot size specifically. Originally, there was a sunset clause in our ordinance that was put in that was taken out. So I think it'd be interesting to see, and I wish I could look a few years down the road and see what happens, but I don't think it is beneficial to our town in the long
run. Switching topics, we touched on this early on, but want to peel it back a little bit. And I think, this might be one of these not in my backyard type issues. I come from the perspective, I'm talking about the overnight parking ban, and Matt Hart, the town manager's suggestion that it is permanently repealed. And Ronnie, I don't think you've done a story on it. I think I read the press release.
So there was a very brief press release. Actually, just before this show, I had a good conversation with Matt Hart about it. So once we're off for tonight, I will have a story that will probably be the lead story in our newsletter tomorrow about the overnight parking ban.
So I used to live on Concord, which is Highland, Prospect, in that neck of the woods over on the east side of town. I now live over on the west side of town, where overnight parking is just simply not a concern. So I think it's a tough issue, because I think depending on where you live in town, it's either a major concern or it's no concern at all. Where do you guys stand on that? Can you talk to a little bit of the nuance? And I don't know where either of you live. I wouldn't ask you to give your addresses on air, but how does it impact you, and what are your thoughts on it?
I live in Westover, Vermont now. No,
there we go. Exactly. Our non-resident resident council.
I think there's some pros and cons to it. Quite frankly, I think from a policing standpoint, not having overnight parking makes it easier to patrol neighborhoods, and And to Mark's point about safety and that pillar of the platform, that makes a lot of sense, not having overnight parking and on-street parking. However, as the density is increasing, up and down Farmington Avenue as an example, there's a lot of apartment buildings and there's very little parking at all. People are begging to park on the streets. And I think if, and I had suggested at one point, having, the way, bigger cities handle it, where you have parking permits. And I think, Ronnie, you probably will be reporting on something like that, having, neighborhood permits. Boston does it in certain districts and neighborhoods. New York does it in Manhattan, where you buy a permit and you can park. So I think that might be something that could help to generate some revenue and at the same time make residents in certain areas able to handle being able to park a car and maintain a car in town.
Mark, any thoughts? Or
I'm just going to say I think we saw this coming as it relates to the accessory dwelling units, and it just goes part and parcel with getting that approved and now allowing multiple families living on one property to now have the ability to parking on the street. So that's all. And as Forrest Gump would say, that's all I have to say about that.
I think it's a tricky issue, as I said, because the town is so diverse. They talk about housing diversity. We really have that here. And then the second thing is garbage. Somebody brought up garbage. And, what if the bins are blocked by a parked car that isn't your parked car?
Well, that'll be addressed actually in my story. And so the overnight parking really right now, it's only banned between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. and they don't start picking up the trash until 6 a.m. So.
Oh, so not really an issue.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's not really an issue.
Okay.
And
Makes sense.
kind of the response was, if somebody parks in front of where the trash and recycling bin is and it doesn't get picked up, they won't do it the next week. So they'll learn. So that's kind of more of a common sense type thing.
So Ronnie, the next several bullet items we really covered. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've got just the last bullet item, and then we've got the Q&A from the audience. Are we good? Budget, grand list, tax, we've covered all that, right?
Yeah. Okay, I think,
right.
And I texted John, but John told me I should ask this question. So the, sorry, John.
I want Ronnie to get in trouble, not me. So
I thought we were getting a weather segment.
I throw Ronnie under the bus, not myself.
Oh no, the weather segment would actually be really, really distasteful, because you're going to tell us it's going to be really cold tomorrow, right?
Chilly, but you know what? It's nice. No more snow. Good riddance.
No more snow is good. Cold is not good.
Yeah.
Unless you lived in New Jersey, where it snowed in northern New Jersey today.
Yeah. North and west of us got some snow. We avoided it, so we're lucky. We're close enough to the water that the air stays mild here. Anyway,
anyway, the question I have though is, so the platform that you've put out, do you feel like the Republican Party in West Hartford kind of as a whole agrees with it? Was it put together collaboratively, or is it more just like the leadership of the party that put this together?
Ronnie, that's a great question. And one of the things that you'll know about me is, we're going to do this together as a team. And so we came together at one of our meetings, and we broke up into focus groups. And we asked the team to come back with here's some of the pillars, here's some things we're thinking about. Let's vet these out as a group. So this was an outcropping of that working collaboratively together. Now, of course, is everybody going to agree 100% on all the items? No. There's probably a few folks that are on this event tonight that probably are not happy with what I said on a couple of things, but you're going to get that. We're not going to be able to agree on everything 100% of the time, but we did this together as a group. Well, and under the leadership of the executive committee, but with all the town committee members, the new town committee members that have been coming on board. I'm excited about it because we built this together. To be able to come out with a platform and agenda to talk about some of the issues and providing our solutions to some of these items there. And like you said, I'm sure my friends on the Democratic side, whether you take the D or the R away from our names, we want to make West Hartford a better place, not just for now, but we've been here for 26, 28 years. What's going to the next 28 years going to look like? And so I'm excited that we did this together, and that we've had more people join the RTC. We've had more people look about running in the fall for the town council. And we also have a candidate looking to run in the federal side. So, I mean, we've seen a lot more activity, and we've made an effort to expand our marketing efforts to communicate with the folks that are registered Republicans in town. We're reaching out to the unaffiliated, the independent voters. That's kind of what we're trying to do is let them know that we do have a solution. We want to hear from you, and we want to tell you what we're thinking. So I'm excited about it. I'm excited about what we've created and filling out the spots that we do have.
So, and I've waited to share your platform, which I will do along with the video of this program. I kind of didn't want to give it away until we had a chance to discuss it on this show.
No, thank you, Ronnie. I appreciate that. It's a good kicking off point, so I appreciate it.
So we've got about 4 minutes left. So I'm going to try to bang through these last questions. The last question we have is talk about, and I'm not, I don't want to take you back to, the election, that sort of thing, national, because that's not what this broadcast is about. But Mark, you led off by saying, you consider yourself a moderate Republican. Talk about how, in some corners, the Republicans have a bad rap right now. I mean, I hope we can, and maybe in some corners the Democrats do too. So, but how do you differentiate yourself, and how do you get the message out from the national party and some of the dialogue that's happening nationally that maybe doesn't sit well locally?
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the residents when I've door knocked and working for my campaign and for Lee's campaign and a bunch of other folks' campaign a lot of times it does turn to what the national issues are and everything else. And I'm not going to try to be glib in this one, but what it really comes down to is what we're trying to focus on with that to basically cut out that noise is let's focus on what's important to West Hartford and then what's important to to Connecticut itself. We cannot control what happens at the national level. Unfortunately, I am a Republican. Have I had questions, right, over the last what has transpired? Yes, I think we all do, across the board, whether it was back before. But right now, it's focusing about West Hartford, John and Ronnie, and focusing on these 4 pillars and getting people to look at that. Lee, myself, the executive committee, Sean Daly, Kay Straw, Ari Shell, people that are on the executive committee, the rest of the RTC. We're West Hartford residents. Our kids go to school here. We live here in town. We coach. We're hanging out together, and we want what's best for our town. And so I know it's kind of platitudes on that type of stuff, but really that's kind of, John, what we need to do is think about West Hartford and try to not disassociate, but focus on what's here. And I think that I've always believed in that. And we are aligned with the national party, but we don't always have to agree at the national level and just focus on what's happening here. As I mentioned at the top, I don't know if I mentioned here or not, but yeah, we're in a community that is diverse in thought, diverse in looking at things, but we as our mayor said, we are a liberal town. And how do we look at certain things and come together as together? History buff and myself, Lee went to school and got a degree in history, I think it was, at Lehigh. I go back to the days when you got Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill having lunch together and working things out at a national level. That type of, that's how I grew up. And looking at certain things, whether it's the Massachusetts Republicans and everything else, and and Governor Baker and what he's done, that's kind of my role models when I look at certain things. And John Kasich, because I spent a lot of time in Ohio, I loved what he did. I loved how his approach was. I agree with a lot of things he's done. Now, does that ingratiate me with other parts of our party? But no, it's more important is what we do here in West Hartford and for the betterment of our community itself. So.
And we lost your video, at least on my end.
Nope,
Does anyone else see Mark?
I've got it here. Yeah, we've got it.
Okay. For some reason, it disappeared from my screen. So
I just want to add. I couldn't have said what Mark said better. I go all the way back. You talk about election, but I go back to when I was elected. When we were holding signs at KP, I was there with it was Ari Steinberg and Leon Davidoff. And they're neighbors of mine. And I looked at both of them and they looked at me. And first and foremost, we're a community. We're neighbors. And, we all have a vested interest in trying to create a better place for not only us, but for our children and their children. And I hope my children come back to town and their children do. I've had a great time here, and will hopefully continue to have a great time here. And it's a lovely town to be part of, and I'm honored to be on the town council, honored to be elected to serve, and it's been so far a great experience.
We were fortunate,
as is this podcast.
Yeah, we were fortunate to have the governor on back in November, and he gushed over how vibrant and exciting and young and youthful this town is. And he really talked about it being one of his favorite spots, the restaurants, and all that we have to offer. So, Leon, as a parting comment, I couldn't agree with you more. Ronnie, I think we've more or less touched on most of the comments. Is there anything out there? I know somebody asked about solar and wind on the schools, but that's a Board of Ed issue, and I believe we're already at net neutral, aren't we?
It's yeah, and that's actually something that's being pursued as roofs are replaced. Solar panels are being put in where they can, and it actually doesn't cost the town to do that because we work with a company called Verigy that pays for it, and that that is being done. I'm trying to. I don't think there's too many questions that we missed.
There's a funny comment, and it's April Fool's, so I'm going to read it. It's a great comment from Michael Williams. He says, every time someone says vibrant, a Lamborghini crashes and explodes. So at least 2 Lamborghinis have crashed and exploded, at least due to my talking over the last minute or so. Anyway, gentlemen, Mark Merritt, Legal, thank you so much. We really, it was great to have you on. I know it took us a few weeks to get things organized, but sometimes schedules can be tricky, but really, thank you for so much for coming on and sharing with us and the town the platform. I think it's great. I think these are the types of conversations that need to be happening a lot better than some of the other conversations that happen, certainly nationally. And we're grateful for having you on. So, Ronnie, any last thoughts before I say goodbye to our audience?
No, thank you. And my apologies for my hay fever is acting up. So if I...
It's that time of year, isn't it? That we're going to see orange stuff all over everything in a few weeks. But at least it means the temperatures are warming. So that's a good thing. See, back to the weather. It's so easy for me. It's natural. So
exactly. So Ronnie, John, thank you very much for your time. And my offer to you, I'd love to come back and do a crossfire version with John, my counterpart, who's the chair of the Democratic Town Committee. So I'd love to be able to do that with you as well and have another great dialogue here that we had tonight.
We'll definitely try to make that happen. I think the conversation across the aisle is really important at this point. And so anything we can do to facilitate that, I know I'm on board. So, and I'm sure Ronnie's on board too. So for Ronnie Newton, managing editor of WeHow.com, and John Lyons, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you on our next show.
Thank you.
Thank you.